So this week on the Any Given Runday podcast, we have a running coach with a seriously impressive running resume of a 3:55 mile, a 13:42 5K, a 1 hour 6 minutes and 20-second half marathon. He was last year's pacer for the elite women in the Dublin Marathon and has 2 national indoor championships to his name in the 1500 meter. David McCarthy, welcome to this week's episode of the Any Given Runday podcast. How are you getting on?
Good, lads. Good. Finally, good to be on here. I've been listening to your show on many runs.
I find it weird. Someone of your caliber is listening to us talking about eating chicken and rice in the morning before races, and you're as elite as it comes in our book. And I suppose is how.
Well, first of all, you have
you go so fast.
Yeah, the guests you get on are great and always interesting people to listen to, and the topics of conversation are good. And I think sometimes too, like when you have, I suppose, people like when you can kind of connect those that like who've been kind of maybe at a higher level in the sport to those that are more in an entry level, I think that makes for really good conversations. And I think like it's good to be able to kind of extract the information and then give it to everyone, and I think that's why your show is really interesting.
Thanks very much. We do appreciate it. And I suppose to start extracting that golden information from you, I suppose the best part we always do is look back into, you've had a wonderful career in sport. And most athletes we talk to, they don't really see it as had a great career. They just see it as running and training. But how did it start for you in terms of a young age? And it's always an interesting factor is finding out how it started and how you got involved.
Yeah, I mean, I was in it from the get-go. My mom would have been competing when I was a kid. So even when I was like 5 years of age, my mom would have been competing in sports. So like back in the day when I was like in the 90s, what you would have had is especially down here in Munster, you would have had a lot of like races that would have been on around like, maybe GA clubs would have hosted them, or athletics clubs that would have had them in GA pitches. So you'd have like, especially because I'm from Dungarvan here, so we would, between the Waterford and Cork area, would have had a lot of races in the likes of Carricknavar, Carricktwohill, Middleton, Blarney Sports. Then you had like Ferrybank Athletic Club, and they were basically what would be a 400-meter track marked around a football pitch, and you go down, and it might have started off with literally the age group was the Tiny Tots, and my mom would have been racing. And I would have gone along, and like I just remember like just jumping into sprints, and like I suppose like just from the get-go I was kind of one of the best, so that kind of kept me in it. I was never involved in any other sport. I never played GA or anything. At the age of 7 I was Munster cross country champion, and from then on up I was one of the best in my age group in the country. I would have been like in the same age group as like Ciarán Leonard from Leavell in Cork. And then, you also had Brian Markham would have been another big guy back in the day. His sister Niamh Markham, she's Ennis Track. And then you'd have had then the likes of a lot of the lads that I was on the European under-23 winning team with back in 2010 when we won the Eurocross. Brendan O'Neill, Michael Mulhare, David Rooney, John Coughlin. We've been racing each other since we were kids, and I suppose that was a good enough standard. So that kind of kept, as they say, iron sharpens iron. But my biggest rival over the years was Ciarán Leonard. And Ciarán and myself, like through the age groups, like we were always the best in at our age at national level, from 8s, 9s, 10s, the whole way up until we both went to America on scholarship.
So during that rivalry as kids, do you hate each other? Do you like each other? What way does that work? Especially because you've done it from so young. So you're are you just arch nemesis, or are you friends now?
Yeah, great friends, but obviously like rivalries. I think both of us kept each other going in the sport because we both knew each was really good, and we knew if we were beating each other, that said a lot about ourselves. Like if Ciarán wasn't there, I probably wouldn't have had any competition for a lot of years, and vice versa for him. And at the end of the day, like the way I look at it is like like I never get caught up in one person, because there's a whole world of people out there to beat. So if you start looking at one person, you're going to limit your development. And definitely it was always about beating Kieran. And I'm sure it was the same for him against me. And definitely when we were younger, he tended to be more of the stronger runner, and I was more of the sitter and kicker. So like I would be just trying to sit on him as long as I could. Now he always made it hard for me to do that. But yeah, I suppose, I contribute my development down to him too, because like anytime when I was training, it was to beat Kieran, and that pushed me on.
When you got that scholarship to America with Kieran, and you're over there, is it like going to, like, it is the American way? They'll do things all bigger and all the rest over there. Is it like that and a whole new world, or is it just like running is running? It's not that much difference between there and over here, or was your eyes open when you got over there?
No, it's a different game over there. If I could go back and do anything again, it would be the NCAA system. I say that all the time. It's professional in what's still a college environment. When you look at the standard of it now, like I knew from, well, like you see, I suppose growing up here first, like I came from the county that John Tracy came from,
Yeah.
and the thing to do back then was you go to America, like that was it. And that was like Eamon Coughlin's, Frank O'Mara's, Marcus O'Sullivan's, Ray Flynn's, the whole lot of them. And it was always Villanova, Providence, and I took my recruiting trip to both Villanova and Providence, and two great schools. And I just went with Providence because on my recruiting trip, I just kind of got a vibe from it that this is the place I want to be for the next 5 years. And then there was also something nice, I don't know, about like the Tracys came from Waterford, and not only Waterford, but like actually the Dungarvan area. And I felt like that was a kind of cool, I suppose, legacy to continue on. But no, the system over there is unbelievable. I mean, you're talking about also too, like it's just the racing is like relentless, and I say that in a good way, because like I feel like the way the world has gone now and the standard of racing, you have to become robust at racing. I think in Ireland maybe you're not pushed to race as much, nor is there pressure to race as much. Like DCU, UCD, any of the colleges, like, if you don't race, they're not going to like kick you out, And so like, the way it worked over there, come September, we had a cross country race every 2 weeks up onto NCAA cross. And you're talking about cross country races where you're running like, 23 minutes for a 5 mile, 8K cross country. And you're flying all over the country, and then you run NCAA nationals, which usually falls the end of November. And then, for us international kids are more so from Europe, you're probably coming back home and getting pre-selected for the European cross-country championships. You'd come back and you'd do that. Then you'd have 2 weeks at home at Christmas, but you're already thinking about indoors. And then you're back in January, start of January, and your first week back there, you're straight into an indoor race. And again, usually for those athletes that are able to qualify for NCAAs, and, I was one of them, that means you have the full length of the season, right? So that means you go from the start cross-country season to NCAA cross country, and then you go from the start of the NCAA indoor season to NCAA indoor championships, and then literally 2 weeks later you're probably starting the outdoor season, where you go out to the likes of Mount Sac, California, Stanford for a meet there, and then you go through all your whole Penn relays, conferences, regionals, and then straight up to again NCAA nationals if you're lucky enough to make them, and then you come home and you run maybe a European under 23 championships. So I remember my sophomore year. I remember even like, from indoors to the end of the outdoor season. So started indoors to the end of outdoors, which would have been the European under 23 championships in Kaunas in Lithuania. I had 21 races from January to that July. But the way I look back on it is every mile was 4 minutes or under, every 3K was 8 minutes or under, and every 5K was 14 minutes or under.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I pulled a hamstring 4 minutes ago listening to you talk about this. That's an insane load.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of questions to stem from this. The first one is that the closest that an Irish athlete can feel to being a professional?
Yeah, 100%. To be honest, actually, I suppose the sad thing about it is a lot of kids go through the system over there thinking they might go on to bigger and better things, but ultimately that might be the biggest thing they were ever at, because it's so hard. The world of professional running is so small, but the depthness in the world is so big. You have actually people out there with Olympic standards that aren't even sponsored athletes, and so where when you're in the college environment over there, everything is paid for, everything is handed to you, for 4 to 5 years over there. Gear is handed to you, training facilities are handed to you, education, food. I remember we used to travel to races, and when we get to the airport in Providence to fly off somewhere, you get your DMs, your money for the weekend, and Ray'd be just handing out the dollars as we were getting on the plane. Like where would you get that? And so we hadn't a care in the world to think about, which meant there was also less stress, and then also too, I just felt like you didn't have the option of thinking about what race you'd run. It was this for the next 4 to 5 years. The system was the same. It was the same cross-country races. It was the same indoor races. It was the same outdoor races. And it made you get on the conveyor belt, because ultimately that's what the elite world is. And it's the only thing I would say that maybe is the downside of when you're here is, as an athlete, maybe if you don't go across, you've too much, you have the option not to do it. And I feel like when the option is there, then you might avoid it. Where there it was just do or die, and and at the end of the day, when it comes to professional sport at any level anyway, it is survival of the fittest, So at the end of the day, everyone wants to be a professional athlete, but not everyone is going to be one, and that's the reality of sport, isn't it?
And I suppose scholarship is a two-way street. They're looking for performing athletes. If they're going to pay for your meal ticket and they're handing you the cash when you land in Berkeley, or you're competing in California, they want results for their university, and that's what they're looking for at the end of the day. So it is a professional outfit. It's a team that they hope they can
100%.
manage you to get the records.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. Because I do think now I do see I see a lot of people getting scholarships now that I'm like, how did they how does that person get a scholarship? Not but times I see people who are maybe barely breaking 4 minutes and 2 minutes for an 800, 1500, and they're getting scholarships. But maybe there's money there in lots of different schools, and that's great. It gives people opportunities. But I am also a believer in that, you're there to do a job. And if you're not doing your job, well, you're getting, put it this way, when I was in Providence College, the academic fees per year back then were $52,000 a year. So I did 5 years there. So that was $250,000. And that's probably not even including all the athletic fees. So you're not there on a free ride, and you're there to do a job. And a lot of people maybe get caught in the college lifestyle, which that is also there too. And that is true. You do have because unfortunately you are around other college athletes, not college athletes, college students that are there to have a good time. And you just got to know what you want. It is easy to get distracted. It's also easy to get distracted if you're unfortunate to go through a period of injuries and stuff like that, when it just doesn't go right for you. And that is tough, and people have lost their scholarships because they haven't been performing, but ultimately that's what you sign on for.
Was that always hanging over you?
What's that?
Was that always hanging over you, that you could lose a scholarship to keep you on the straight and narrow? Or
yeah, I never felt that for myself, because I always knew that was never going to be an issue for me. I was going to be performing, and the reality was too on the team that even if I wasn't operating at 100%, I was still the number one guy on the team. So I had my own ambitions that never even came into. I was not running for anybody else, only myself. And my motivation was high enough that but now, in saying that, I was lucky that I didn't, although I had my ups and downs. Yes, I had my injuries. Yes, I had more sicknesses. And the problem over there is, you're in college, you pick up sicknesses, but when you're on a conveyor belt of racing, you mightn't have a chance to recover. But some people get maybe, more serious injuries that maybe require surgery and stuff like that. And it is a cruel world to get back into if you fall off the wagon there, because there's no time almost to get fit. You have to be you have to use, when you come home and you have a bit of time in the summer, you use that time. When you come home for 2 weeks or 3 weeks at Christmas, you use that time to get fit. And you're just but again, I remember going in as a freshman, and like I always had this ambition where like, okay, yeah, I'll go in now my first year and I'm on singles, but I'll run 70 miles a week on singles. And then by my sophomore year, I'll be at 80s. And then by my junior year, I'll be at 90s. And then maybe senior year, I'll be at 100, like 100. And I'm talking about miles a week. Like, like I remember when I started doubling. And Ray would give you your training program, but he hadn't me on doubles. It was my second semester, my freshman year. So we'll say just the indoor and outdoor season. And I remember I started doubling and I hadn't told him. He gave me the training plan and I was like, oh, Ray, I actually started doubling. And he just said, give me that training plan back. And he just wrote in a couple of morning runs. He said, there you go. And like, you know, like, so like, it was like, even though like, of course he was my coach and of course, like I did everything he said and did, but like, I still had my own like ambition that I was like, regardless of like who's coaching me, like you have to be upping the volume. Like you have to be, your training has to be moving someplace like that. So like, I knew in the back of my head that like, you know, I was willing to train hard. I was willing to put in the work. I knew the work had to be upped. And that's just part of it. Like, you know, there's world-class athletes out there, no matter what way you cut it. You know, of course you have to train in a controlled, sustainable way, but nobody, like, you still have to put in the work, you know?
And what a lot of people don't understand is you're also there as a university. So people listening to this are like, great, I'll train them from young. I'll bring them to the gap pitch and I'll run them riot. They'll be in America now in 16 years. But you had to study as well, because in a lot of these universities, you have to meet a grade average. Was that applied to you as well?
Yeah. So basically, you have to keep all it like student athletes have to have a certain GPA, so grade point average, in order to stay on the team. And so and even at that, like we used to be going, like say we used to be traveling every second week to races. So the races could be on a Friday or a Saturday. So we could be gone Thursday at that week. So you're missing Thursday and you're missing Friday classes. And the professors had no time for that. You might get the nice one or two that have, you know, but even if they were accommodating, you still had to make up for the work you lost. Like the exam is still the exam, the homeworks are the homeworks, whatever is going on, like you still have to do it. So like you have to find a routine. Like, and I remember, like, I mean, I was there for 5 years, and Providence is 50 minutes south of Boston. And I was only ever in Boston to race. I never went up there for a weekend. I never, like, you know, like if I had a weekend off, it was like to just chill, you know, spend longer at brunch on the weekends in the cafe and chill out, you know. And you do want to, like, what I do like about the American system is it was more based on continuous assessment than this one final exam, which meant like, because obviously we would all do the same. It was one final exam, you leave the whole work built up. But like I knew by the end of the terms that, like, you know, like I'm okay, like I'm on tip for my GPA, like I can keep my score where I need it to be. And even at that too, also, like I always looked forward to coming home at Christmas and summer, and like I did not want to be failing an exam and have to be repeating it during the Christmas or summer holiday. So that was another motivator for me.
Is it a case of, obviously there's a cultural difference? Obviously there is a very good, you're talking about Boston, there's a good party side to Boston, and universities in America has a good party side. In Ireland, it can be very difficult to step away as someone with ambitions to be an athlete and say, no, I don't want to go, or I don't want to drink, or I don't want to do that. When you're surrounded in this kind of athlete program, is that easier to do because there's so many other athletes around you?
Oh yeah, like I mean, you just, again, the NCAA system, whether you talk about track and field, basketball, hockey, soccer. I mean, when we used to be in Providence, right, and you'd go into the canteen, you'd all the soccer players sitting together, you'd all the volleyball people, you'd all the basketball people, you'd all the athletics people, and they all had their own way of dressing and their own gear, and they wore it, and that was the environment you were in. And you know, maybe what you would do now. Look, that's not to say we didn't go out, like, you know,
Of course, yeah.
of course.
For
Like,
the most part.
Yeah, but like it never interfered with our running, you know. And I think, again, once you have an environment around you, again, it's a team. Like you are on a team over there, and that keeps you on the straight and narrow, I suppose, you know, and it keeps you motivated and it keeps you accountable, and you don't feel alone, which in what is an individual sport. And I think that does massively help compared to maybe here, yes, of course, you have people, you know, running in all the colleges, but just, I don't know, is it the same? Like, you're still running more for yourself at the end of the day than you are as the team, you know?
5 years straight of that in Providence, and under 23, I think you finished third as well over there in one of the events. And you come off that. Did you come back home? And was that like from all those events and racing and 21 times in the space of 7 months? Like, and you come off that, is that just a complete downer from there, or did you know what you were going to do next and hit the ground running over here? Because obviously you're doing running coach and all the rest. Did that natural transition happen for you?
So that was actually that when I did those 21 races coming back to run the under 23s, that was only my second year in college over there. So I still had another
Wow.
2-3 years after that. And so like for me, I was full of beans, like for running, like, you know, like I was in America, like, so you couldn't tire me. Like now I look back and I don't even know how I trained like I did, you know, and I would say I actually pushed too hard. I don't know, 100% I did, like, you know, and even Ray would say that, like, you know, but I think I survived because of just whatever my own natural energy and my enthusiasm for the sport, which is, I don't know, can you get much higher, you know? But to answer your question, Sean, on the other end, an example of that would be my senior year when I ran my 355 mile. So that indoor season, so going into my senior year, that indoor season, I ran 355 in the mile, which basically had me, at the time, I was only a half second off the NCAA record. It's still to this day the Providence mile record for all the good athletes that have gone through Providence. I still hold the mile record there. And I remember after that, like, you know, I remember like Ray telling me like, oh, there was some agents in you know, had contacted him in relation to me. And this was also, remember, this was 2012. So this was London Olympics, and my 355 mile in the 1500, it equated me out to maybe only being about a second or so off the Olympic standard. So I was like, okay, well, like that looks like I can chase that, right, for this outdoor season. And I got injured outdoor season, and that was it. And yeah, basically once my season was done there, it was pack my bags back to Ireland, and that was it. There was no knocking on the door. There was no agents. There was no nothing. I was back home to Dungarvan by myself. And I was just basically like, for a while after college, you know, Ray continued to coach me, but like it can't work for that long. Like, first of all, his priority is the college over there, but more so like I'm not there, you know, I'm here by myself. And you just don't feel like you have that connection anymore, you know. So, you know, I was coaching myself then. And that was tough. Well, like I suppose I was motivated anyway, but like, you know, I came back to basically being like a half second off the NCAA record, having done what I did, 355 in the mile, and just back here in Dungarvan training by myself, like living at home with my parents, and just seeing could I like make Irish teams for internationals and try and secure a bit of Irish Sports Council funding and see where things went. And that was 2012, and I was at home 2012, 2013. I was still coached by Ray until 2013. And then at the time then, Chris Jones was he was the endurance coordinator for Athletics Ireland. I was coached by him for a few years. I moved to Dublin. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I felt like I just like plateaued. There was something missing. I felt I didn't have that mojo I had when I was in college. I just didn't feel the energy for it. I still ran well. Like I qualified for World Indoors in 2014. I finished 16th in seniors in Eurocross. I ran, a couple of I ran sub 340 in the 1500 a few times, but it never took off. And then in 2015, I got 2 double stress fractures in my sacrum, one after the other. So that like the kind of recovery routine from that is like basically 3 months of nothing and then build yourself back. But so I did that, and then I was only back about 6 weeks, and then I got another stress fracture in my sacrum again. And basically in 2015, that had me out for about 7 months. And then in 2016, I had my first run of January and worked my way back. And my first race back then was there's a Belgian meet, a race out in Belgium, the Origin meet that a lot of the Irish go to there around May time. And I hadn't been on the track in 2 years. I hadn't even spiked up or done a workout. And I opened up my first 5K in 13:42. I remember closing my last 800 that day in 1:58. And again, you know, it sounds good, but then I was so annoyed because I was 2 seconds off the qualifying time for the European Championships. So I ran 13:42. I equaled my PB. I couldn't even run a second faster, 2 seconds faster. And the thing is, had I ran 2 seconds faster that day, boom, I would have been qualified for the European Championships that summer. And there's my summer sorted. But I didn't, and I missed it. And when you're, again, no agents, no like that, it's quite hard to actually find races to actually run that fast. And I had nowhere to, I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what race. And about a week later, I was out running, and I literally came to a stop on a 5-mile run. Literally the energy wasn't in my body to run. And in that moment, I was like, yeah, that's me done. And that was the end of my running career professionally then. And yeah, that was literally the last time I properly competed at that end. Now I'm back running from a different point of view of enjoying it. But I left the sport, I didn't compete for 6 years after that. And I went away and just, yeah, kind of got into a bit of CrossFit. I've stayed a little bit involved with the sport, thankfully. Down in Cork, you had Steve Macklin, who was coaching. Steve would have been the national junior endurance coach at the time, and he would have coaching the likes of Darren McElhenney, Micheál Power, all of those boys. And I would have been up and down, and those boys kind of at least kept it ignited with me. And I would go up and maybe help when Darren was a younger lad, pace him in sessions, and kind of built a relationship there to a point then when actually Steve ended up getting a job out in Doha in Aspire Academy in 2018. He ended up basically, I suppose, handing the lads over to me to start coaching them. And that kind of, I was always coaching a bit on the side, and I definitely always had an interest, and I coached myself for many years. I coached myself to that 13:42. Yeah, so I was coaching the lads. So in 2019, I had an amazing group down in Cork. I had Darren McElhenney, Micheál Power, David McGlynn, Rory Casey, Evan Byrne, Laura Nicholson. I'm probably forgetting people there now, but anyway, I had such a good group, and we had such a good year. That year, I coached Dara to, breaking 3 national junior records. He broke the indoor 5,000 meter record, the outdoor 3,000 meter junior record, the outdoor 5,000 meter record, and he also medaled at the European juniors in the 5,000. And then Micheál Power qualified for European under 23s, and then Micheál, Laura, and Dara also qualified for Eurocross. And off the back of that, then I ended up actually getting a coaching job out in Aspire Academy the following year. And that was cool because then I was actually, my full-time career was as a coach, and actually it has been since then, which has been amazing. So I've never lost touch with the sport, and I'm so glad I didn't. And by just sticking in it that way, I never thought I could, I thought the only place I could make a career from coaching would be as an NCAA coach. But I never really wanted to go to America, and I feel that time for that has slipped now. And also too, I do, hats off to those NCAA coaches. It's a grind. It's a full-time job. You're never off. And I do like having time for a family life as well, and still enjoying my own running. So that's where I am now. And, since then I'm back from Aspire. Unfortunately, my experience out there was during COVID, which meant, how sport went during then. And at the time, myself and my wife weren't married. She's from Argentina, and long story short, between border restrictions and everything, we went over a year without seeing each other. So we're back in Ireland now. We're living here, and yeah, I'm full-time coaching, and yeah, happy days.
It's a phenomenal story. It's amazing. And if I can bring it back to the feeling, and it's one thing that a lot of our listeners don't know is, and I don't say it to jest, is what is it like to get so close to that NCAA record? What is it like to see that clock say 3:55?
It's one of going back to just, I think, your point there earlier, there's very few times in life where we're actually really satisfied with our result. And I actually think that is running, because you're never going to be satisfied. Nobody at any level, however fast you run today, you're going to go away tonight. You're going to think about how great that was for a little while, and you're just going to start planning on how to run faster. You know, like you come fourth in the Olympics, you want to come third. You come third, you want to come second, and you come second, you want to win it, and then you win it, you need to hold on to it. So it's relentless, right? And I think it's important to realize that that is the sport. You know, when I ran that 355, I would say on less than one hand, I could count the amount of runs where I feel like I really nailed it, you know. And that 355 was one, but I actually felt so good that day. I actually was like, I could have ran 353, you know. And of course, like you know, I look at my career as like I just lacked a bit of luck, I would say. Like I was like, oh, how come I couldn't have been a half second faster and had the NCAA record? Like that would have been unbelievable. Like I missed that one, didn't I? You know, and but like 355 was definitely one of those times where like you look and you're like, wow, like you shock yourself. And that doesn't often happen to, I'd say, many people that often. So that as I'm sure and everyone must have experienced it at some point, but that endorphin buzz you get off a good run, there's no feeling like it, and I think that's what keeps us going, you know, for those days.
All your experience since in coaching and stuff like that, has there ever been anything you've learned since and went, had I applied that back then going for that 355, it could have meant that half second? Or is it literally just that was as close to a perfect race as you could do?
That was close to the perfect races you could do, but like, and I don't think I could have at the time, you know, in that moment would have done anything different for that race. But looking back on my career, I would have done a lot of things differently, you know. I mean, like I never once did S&C when I was as a college athlete. And one thing I kind of suffered a bit from when I was racing was I always felt my kind of form buckled a bit in the last 100 meters. So I feel like I didn't have that robustness in the body. Two, when we talk about, you know, now, of course, we all hear the word threshold, we all hear lactates, we all hear that. And basically, ultimately, what the whole concept of that doing is a threshold run is supposed to be kept aerobic, right? And like, that's what I never did. So I would have done tempos, I would have done what was deemed tempo runs, but they were completely anaerobic, meaning basically I'm in a deficit more than I'm keeping oxygen in the body. And the problem is with that is when you're in that place, you're not improving the efficiency of that. And so I think that's what ended up happening me, why I kind of plateaued at that 13:40 5K and 3:55 mile. I feel like my natural ability got me there, but my training needed to be better to get me from on there. And I feel I just wasn't pushing my physiological system forward. Where now, like I realized, had I gone back, and like I actually had so much energy for racing and training that like had I actually kept my powder a bit dry, I think actually my average of races would have been higher in terms of the performances. I had a lot of poor races, I had a lot of average races, I had the races where I came away and I was like, that wasn't me at all, like, you know. But I think I just left too much in training. And so I would have gone back and I would have just basically kept the leash on the dog a bit longer. And then I would have also I would have looked after my sleep and nutrition a lot better. You know, I just didn't, that definitely wasn't optimal, you know. So all of those things across the board could have been way more optimal, which surely would have led to that half second in the mile, maybe those 2 seconds in the 5K. You know, but that's hindsight. And now I get to bring that learning into my coaching, which is, so it's not lost, you know, and it's because of having done the other way, I know it, you know, and that's why now if I didn't do it that way, maybe I wouldn't know coaching as well as I do now, you know.
With all the athletes you mentioned there and how great the Irish athletes got on in the Olympics, has it been the coaching that's caught up in the last 10, 15 years to give you that standard, or have we been just insanely blessed with just the right timing for athletes, or what do you attribute it to?
Yeah, I think I think that the sport has continuously been moving forward from day one, right? Like we kind of look like, but like every generation is actually always running faster, because there's more knowledge being applied, there's more learning being applied, we have more history to look back on, and then it's always like this: iron sharpens iron. So like when I went over to America to qualify for NCAAs in the mile my freshman year, you got in a 4:01. My sophomore year, which is your second year, at 3:59. Basically now to qualify in the mile, you have to run a 3:55 to actually get to NCAAs. So everybody in the heat, like there's 2 or 3 heats at NCAA indoors, and everyone in it is a 3:55 miler or faster. But like that's what it does. Like at the end of the day, we're actually not out there to run times. We're out there to compete against each other. And if you run faster, well, then I have to run faster than you to beat you. And so that's what ends up bringing people on, you know, and that's why now we see Olympic standards and world standards are fairly outrageous actually at the moment, you know. Like, I mean, I think like the 5K, like, is to qualify, the automatic is like 13:08 in the 5K. Like, that's insane. Like, you know, I mean, so now of course you have these point scheme and all of that, but that's not the point. Is like that's where the standard has got to. And I think that's always the case. I think now you see in high schools, and especially in America, you see a lot of sub 4-minute miles. And I suppose that's just evolution, isn't it?
When you have that 3:55 to qualify for the Olympics is the goal you're saying there. But when I was watching the Olympics, a lot of it was in different heats. Well, this person runs late, this person, you know, has a stronger finish, and he or she's raced against this person. They have to watch out for this, and this. But as a layman watching it, I'm like, well, if you hit a time, it's just about time. But then it's like racing the different people it is. You haven't been there in that absolute elite level. How much is it knowing the other person, or is it like literally just stick in your lane, run your race? How much does other people matter, or the arch rivals you talked about earlier?
Oh, like that's where it all comes out at the championships, because every race up until that point of the year has pacemakers in it, and everyone is trying to chase the Olympic standard. So they have pacemakers in. People don't really care if they get beat once they get their standard to get to the championships. And then next thing, everyone gets to the championships, and a lot of people like actually haven't practiced racing. And they don't know what to do. They don't know how to operate in a race that's actually run at 15 seconds, goes through the first half of, like, goes through the first 800 of the 1500 at like 15 seconds slower than their PB pace, and they're tripping over each other. And, you know, that's then when it becomes a tactical race.
Right.
That's when, you know, basically your race IQ comes in, and, you know, knowing how to read the situation. And then also, like, are you confident in your kick? Because ultimately, more attributes of an athlete come into play in championship running, where, like, basically when it's a pace race, and like the biggest example of that is that Jakob Ingebrigtsen, right? Like, the only time he's gotten beaten in the last few years is at the last two world championships and in the Olympics in the 1500, and every other race after that he hasn't been touched. And it's because, like, there's no pacemaker there to take out the first few laps to draw everyone out, because he's way stronger than everybody else. But when you bring it back to a race that's, you know, ran a little bit slower and the kickers are there, like, then you're bringing in those guys that have faster 800-meter PBs. And then also too, like, it then comes down to also too, like, how calm are you in a chaotic situation? And like, that's what the beauty about championship running is. And I really like it, because it shows the full attributes of it as an athlete you need to have in order to be successful. And I think it's far more exciting. I think, yes, it's great seeing athletes run fast. We see enough of that throughout the year. I'm a massive Jakob Ingebrigtsen fan, but I think it's so exciting when he's almost been beaten, because, like, it just makes for exciting watching, right? And then also, you know, people going in there thinking they can have a clip off him. So, you know, and I would have felt that too. Like, I would have been probably a little bit stronger myself back in the day at pace racing. I would have been a bit more of a strength runner. I would have, you know, gone through times in championship races where I would have felt a little bit unsure of what to do. And the other side of it is that, like, when you get to the championships, there is nothing between everyone. And if you're going to be the rabbit, you know that, like, you know, everyone's going to be sitting on you. And then, you know, that guy in the front, all he's thinking about is, I hear all these lads sitting on me now. When are they going to come by? Like, what are they doing? And you start thinking about everyone in the race bar yourself, you know? And that's then when the race is lost as well.
And obviously in these races, and people are like, the strategies and stuff, they're the finest of margins that win or lose a medal. 0.001 of a second can cost you a medal. At what point in these races is it from the very start? Is it from when you're settling into the pack? What are you constantly making decisions on? I need to move up, or I can see him move. Are you basing it off other people's body language or their form? Are you studying them, their race styles? What do you look at to make these decisions?
So let's take a 1500, for example. Like, of course, you're out there competing against others, so you have to read the race, but there's certain ways that running the race is better. So I'm a big believer in staying in on the rail, because it's the shortest route. when you see people running in lane 2 or 3, if you actually add that up over the total distance, you ran longer. Okay. And then secondly too, like there's a lot of like unnecessary moves in the race. So like I remember like you know, Eamon Coughlin always said to me when I was a kid, he said 1500 meters, one move. You have one move and one move only. And I see a lot of the time guys in a race, if you watch the 1500, a guy is sitting back in 10th, and then on the second lap he makes a big surge up to 4th, and then by the third lap he's gone back to 10th again, and it's this yo-yoing. So that's a waste of time. Like if you look at Jakob Ingebrigtsen, he'll just sit at the back and then just move to the front, and then he goes from there. There is no up and down the field. But like you have to kind of like, I still think no matter what the way the race is run, there are certain key principles that help you run a race better. And like the 1500 is definitely a messier race than we'd say what the 5K would be, or the 10K. They tend to still be drawn out a bit more. The Africans like to kind of get the race going a bit sooner. But like the 1500 definitely is a very tactical race and a messy race. And I just would be one that I would say, get in on the rail, stay calm, and the gap always opens up. And like, yes, okay, people say, what if it doesn't? It does, because the natural instinct to do of people when they come off the final bend is to move wide, to push the ones that are coming around them out wide. Cole Hocker, we saw, got up the inside of Jakob Ingebrigtsen. You also see, like back in the day, Nick Willis, the New Zealand guy, he got his Olympic medal through that as well. It always happens. But I do think if you go back and study a lot of the races, there's some key decision making. I see people like running wide the whole time, yo-yoing up and down the field. That's all energy. And like, you know, you're just wasting it for, like, at the end of the day, most of the people in a 1500 get to 1200 meters together. And it's basically what you can do over the last 300 meters. And so, yeah, there is definitely tactics to it and a better way to read the race. And you can see that there's some people that are operators, and then others you're just like, that person there is a headless chicken. They need to learn how to race better, you know.
Your golden rule you talk about on Instagram makes a lot more sense now. Yeah, you got to race to get better at racing, and that's something that needs to be done a lot more. Like you said in that Instagram reel, I think it was that one where you talk about, you just, in that situation, you just can't replicate that in training, that kind of pushing and all the rest. And it makes more sense, all the racing and stuff you did throughout it. But changing gears a little bit from racing, and when you were talking about that gaps and stuff, you have a reel when you did the pacing last year for the elite women. One, at that level, it still had to be petrifying, like that you were the lead pacer. But you could see during it, one of the reels, like you're literally pointing to the leader and be like, be on this side, be on this side. And you talk about afterwards how halfway through, it was a you on your Garmin, it was a 5:35 mile race or pace or something, and then the actual road race was a 5:39. Talk us through pacing that, and then just seeing the times and stuff coming up, like, and how you were feeling doing something like that.
Yeah, so that was a cool experience, and like, you know, it was pressure in a different way, but exciting. And yeah, like, you know, when you're asked to lead the elite of any field, you have a job to do, and they're counting on you. And like you have to, like, Dublin, as you know, like the first half is sort of kind of uphill a little bit more. So it's not as if, like, and no marathon, very few marathons, you can just run the exact K each way the whole way. Like, it doesn't work that way. So, you know, you have to know how to read the course, and know that, like, well, like, this is an uphill K, it's going to be slower, so we're not going to be able to hold the pace. If I hold the pace in this, then you're just going to die afterwards, you know. So I'm a big believer in, like, knowing how to read the course, and also, like, I just am a big believer in listening to the watch, because you got to learn to listen to yourself. And I think a lot of people kind of allow themselves to be dictated by the watch too much, or they maybe have their K splits on too much. The other side of it is that we all know that when we run a race with our Garmin, it comes up at, like, shorter distance than what it is, because we're not taking the exact tangents. And like when you're out there for 42 kilometers, you're not exactly on the exact line. And you must remember, it's still satellite, like, it can be slightly off. So, like, what I would definitely recommend is you need to be going by, like, the 5K, 10K markers on the course. That needs to be your parameters. But yeah, like, it definitely, like with Dublin, it was a case too of, like, you know, they wanted to go out at course record pace. I went out at that for the first K, and I knew the women weren't coming with me, so I wasn't obviously going to run away in them, like, you know. So then I had to kind of like do what I could to help them and see. So, you know, you have to listen to them, and you have to read the athletes, and you have to see, like, do they want to go with this? Like, I'm going to stay in the front to like be that lead, break the wind for them, keep it honest. But like, obviously, like, there's no point in me being, you know, 20 meters up the road and nobody with me. Because like maybe at some point they might want to start clicking into gear a bit more. You're also there to guide them, like, you know, knowing the turns that are coming up, you know, taking the shortest tangents and stuff like that. Yeah, it was a really cool event. The atmosphere out there was amazing. But like, definitely for the marathon, like, I think like it's key to kind of probably have the splits every maybe 5 kilometers as opposed to every kilometer, and learning how to read the course, and also knowing that, like, let's be honest, like, you know, you can go there with the best intentions. And like I say to those that I'm coaching to, I'm like you can have the greatest training coming in, but when it comes to marathon day, anything can go. And you can't be like, let the watch dictate you. You got to learn how to feel your own body. And sometimes, like, you know, the weather could be off today. What about if it's a really wet, windy day? Like, you're not going to get the time you did. So are you going to try and keep forcing it and then completely blow up? You got to make the best of the situation on the day. And I think like too often now we're overloaded with technology and information, and we feel we need to have all of this in order to run well. Like, personally for me, actually, when I run road races and all, like those half marathon times and that I've done, I don't have splits. I just go out and run. Like, my race is point A to point B, basically start to finish. This is the course today, and I'm racing the race. And if people say, "Oh, but how do you do that?" I was like, well, if you don't know how, you got to learn. Like, so you got to be able to fail, and then through not necessarily that failing, but that learning, go out the next time and piece it together a bit better and a bit better and a bit better again. Give yourself like a couple of races to get better at learning how to feel yourself, because that's where the true enjoyment in running is. Like, I love the fact that, like, I don't know what time I'm on till I turn into the finish and I see the clock. That keeps my enthusiasm going the whole race. How often have we all gone out and got scared by either we were running too fast or annoyed because the splits weren't where we wanted? And then that determines what the race is in your mind before you're even halfway through it, and it ruins the whole experience. And that's a shame, I think, you know. So I definitely think we need to learn how to race more. And I feel like racing is racing, you know, and I feel like just learn how to read your body and have fun with it more like that. And of course, maybe have your parameters, maybe if you're 5-10K halfway, but don't be looking down on the watch, up and down the watch like a yo-yo, you know.
That's right.
So
Go ahead.
the when you're looking at, obviously, the shorter distance, the mile was all yours, but you've set some phenomenal records for yourself in terms of the other distances. Have you enjoyed the transition into longer distances? Has it always been something you wanted to do, or are you just enjoying this phase of, because obviously leading elite women is still a phenomenal standard of marathon. It's a phenomenal pace. It's and to be in control of a situation, to be able to talk, not to be gassed and trying to guide them around. Are you enjoying that transition into longer distance along with coaching? Are they two very different games? And are you happy to have played both of them to a very high standard?
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely loving it. It's making me feel like I have another new life in running, you know. Realistically, I'm probably not going to run 3:55 in the mile again, you know. But nor am I trying to. Like, I don't want to go down that road. I'm looking forward to like right now, my PB in the half marathon is 66 minutes. I do think I can improve on that. I haven't had the urge myself yet to race a marathon. I think racing 42K, 26 miles is an absolute grind fest. But I think my way of transitioning into that is doing something like pacing the elite women and getting a buzz for it. After running Dublin last year, I was like, oh my God, the atmosphere there. Yes, I want to run that someday. I think I'm really enjoying, like, in the last few years, I've ran Berlin half, I've ran Amsterdam half, Copenhagen, I ran the Rack half in Dubai. They're like, I think it's some buzz when you're running through the cities, when the roads of the cities are roaded off for all the athletes athletes out there, and you just get to have a tour of the city, you know. And so I am enjoying it because I have no previous experience with it, so I'm not comparing to before. And I think pacing the women is a great challenge. And first of all, it's just getting me covering the distance this year in Dublin. All going well, I would actually like to be able to take the women the whole way, like literally to 40K. That then will at least put a marathon into my legs. And, the course record is 2:26. If we can run 2:26, 2:25, well, that's a half marathon PB for me, or sorry, a marathon PB for me. And then maybe down the road I do it. But I suppose I'm a little bit reserved about the marathon, in the sense that I feel you also give up a lot of running for the marathon. So I think when people get into marathon training, and more so I kind of find those who are running 3 hours or over, it tends to be just a slog fest. And I feel people get tied down with having to get the long run in every weekend, and they're probably missing out on many years of being able to improve their 5K 2 half marathon time. And I feel you can come back and attack that, basically week after week, and your training doesn't have to be in a place where you have to go out and run a 20-mile long run on the weekend. I like to have a training system that's sustainable, almost like 52 weeks of the year. I get people love the marathon and want to do that, but I would massively encourage people to go spend time to try and bring down their 5K time. Also, if there's people who are struggling to get faster in their marathon, it's probably because they haven't shifted the times forward in their 5K, 10K and half marathon.
We've often said on the podcast that if we were given the offer to race you in a 5K or run a marathon, we'll run a marathon any day of the week, because a best effort 5K is like nothing. Like for us, a sub 25K it's like the hardest thing we will ever do. And the marathon, although it is difficult to slog, it just feels like it's not that hard until the final 5K, where you just have to hold on. What advice do you have? Because a lot of people and a lot of athletes, a lot of coaches say you kind of go back to the speed work, you build on that, you then move into the longer distance and try and improve your time, and rinse and repeat. Is that what a lot of people are missing? And should people just embrace that more? Obviously, you've alluded to it, but what advice do you have for people to kind of schedule, say, Dublin, post Dublin, and we run? What should we look at for the year ahead? How should people be considering their training with 5Ks and 10Ks?
Yeah. So first of all, I go to say, like, if you take an example of you go and you look at marathon training, right? If you think about in every sport in the world, it's actually always dictated from the elites. It is like even your training for Dublin is still dictated from kind of what the elites do. But what people forget is that elite marathon runners came from the track, and so they bring that with them. And so it's easier to run longer, faster stuff when you have a bit of pace and pop in your body. When you don't have pace and pop in your body, you just never take off, And then it's also not a case of like, to improve your 5K, you go out and all you do is like 5K at 5K pace. No, that's not what you do either. Like, you just bring back the volume, you bring back, like, you still do your threshold running, but you shorten the intervals to allow more life in the body. And then maybe, yes, you do a couple of faster sessions, but like not necessarily like killing yourself with speed. Like, honestly, to run a fast 5K, what's probably happening, people, is they're actually just dead from overtraining, Yeah. And so it's about like keeping freshness in the body to actually promote life, because a lot of the time, if you think about like people's average pace for the 5K, for 1K, it's probably not that hard for them to do, but they're just tiring. And so also, like, for most people who are running Dublin, like I always say to people, like, we're not full-time athletes, like, so you have only one bag of energy, so it's gone with family life, work, etc. And a lot of people are bringing tired bodies to training as well, so it's a lot about your own energy as well. That's one thing you have to get right first. For me, any workout I give to any of those that I'm coaching, like, okay, yes, I give the training zones, but if I was to just give it of a perceived effort out of 10, it would never be more than a 6, 7 out of 10. So what it's making them doing, it's you're going to the session, you're leaving the session feeling, oh my God, I feel good, I could have ran faster. It's like, yeah, don't. Hold on to that. Hold on to it. Hold on to it again. hold on to it again. Now stand in the start line of that park run or 5K. Now let it go. Like, it's energy. It's like, how many people probably go through a marathon training phase block, and by the time they get to Dublin, they just feel like a sack of spuds on the starting line. Like, and I would guarantee majority of people will be in that place, and then they have to go through the whole marathon. They'll be absolutely wrecked after, and they won't want to run for another couple of weeks or months afterwards. And then they'll probably start building a half year later. So I would definitely, like, bring the training back. You don't need to be doing long runs, you know, each weekend. Like, have a bit more controlled threshold running. Find what threshold out is, those paces. Bring strides in, short hill strides, to bring power and pop into the body. And then pick a few 5K races. You don't have to be going running a park run every weekend. Like, there's lots of nice races out. Like, say, even in February time, you have the John Tracy 10 mile. That's a nice little one to do. Then there's a lovely couple of, whether it's the Jingle Bells 5K, there's a nice Newmarket 5K down here in Cork. Like, there's lots of races like that. I would also say to people, as I say with those that I'm coaching, going back to what you were saying, Sean, you got to race more to get better at racing. So when you do a 5K race and you come along and you say, that's my time, and then you say, oh, I'm no good. It's like anything. You have to practice racing now. Just because you trained doesn't mean you go out and you're going to, like, you know, it's going to take effect. I always give the example of a boxer, right? Like, a boxer can be in the gym all day doing circuits, sparring, everything. You think the first time he's going to step in the ring, it's all going to come together? No, he's got to get into the ring, get the feel of it, get hit a few times, learn how to read the situation, learn how to read himself, get a bit robust to it, come back, piece it together, come back, piece it again. Like, that's what it's about, like, you know, where, like, the marathon is different. I feel like people go through the marathon and the sense of achievement is finishing it, but I don't know how much it is about, like, how people are, like, yes, of course, there's many people PBing, but there's a lot of people not. And I just feel like I feel like if you're struggling to run a 20-minute 5K, it is there for you, but you just have to, I suppose, that's where it comes into, I suppose, reaching out to people who know, coaches and stuff like that. And unfortunately, I'd love to be able to give you a 2-5-minute reel off of, like, how to improve your 5K, but it so depends on the person and what that person needs to work on in order to kind of, like, I will go through a person and see what is it they need to work on in order to kind of help them build on their 5K. And that's sort of individual at the end of the day too. But the biggest thing is holding on to good energy in the body, because to run a fast 5K, you have to be full of beans on the starting line. And if you're not, more than likely, for people who like running, they're not undertrained, they're overtrained.
One of the things you've hinted on there is get in touch with coaching, and it is something that is so important. A lot of people, and I'm guilty of one of it, is I kind of have to get fitter before I waste my money on a coach, or there's no way I can let David look at me 28-minute walk that I went on there tonight. How do you break that kind of psyche, and how do you encourage people, or how can we as a podcast encourage people to get in touch with the likes of you or other coaches in their area to get their goals and make progress? Because at the end of the day, it's an individual sport, and as long as you're progressing for you and achieving your goals, and it's perfect, then the coach is working for you. How do we break that psyche, or what do you tell people as a coach?
Yeah, like, the most important time to have a coach is from the beginning, because, like, it's kind of like somebody says to me, oh, I'll come back to you when I'm fit. And I was like, well, how has that been working out for you? Like, you know, like when's that going to happen? Like, and then sure, if it does happen, you're not going to need me anyway, so you're fine, like, you know. But, like, how long are you trying to break that sub 25 minute, you know, or whatever it is, or sub 25K? Like, the point is too, is that the hardest part is the starting part. It's like, oh, get going. Like, that is the time when, like, people think, oh, I'll just go out and put in a bit of miles. But, like, there's so many other attributes to it. And also figuring out, like, I'm a big believer in your training zones have to be based off your current fitness. And so a lot of people are making the mistake of basing it off their goal, pace, and that's not how you do it at all. And then secondly, like, is you need that support and that accountability to help you on the journey when the going is tough at the start. And you know, you have somebody to report back to, like you know, with my coaching, I'm a big believer, like, it's that one-to-one. So it's the communication is the biggest part of what I do. It's not, yes, you get your training plan, but it's that you have that accountability, is you can message and talk to me. And do you see the conversations we're having here on this podcast today? Well, this is the conversations I have with all I'm coaching on a daily basis, you know, because there's so much learning to the sport. And like, if it was as easy as we thought, everyone would be running faster and there'd be no problem with getting fit. But we are struggling with getting fit. So obviously it's a little bit more complicated than it looks, you know.
You have a ton of great nuggets on your Instagram. A few of them real quick. So I'm conscious of time, but we won't get to talk in depth on a lot of them. Hills pay the bills. Running alone doesn't help your running form. Improve in the gym, and you talk about strides the day before doing a faster workouts. I'm hesitant to ask this question, but to bring it full circle, so feel free to pick on us if us is the answer. Is there things you're hearing on stuff like maybe me, myself, and Eric talking on an intro to a podcast or a podcast guest, or something you see on social media that you constantly hear and you're like, no, lads, not that. Stop saying that. It's this. Like, you talk like maybe like your easy runs, don't just go off how you feel, or get more hills or strides in before. Is there something you keep hearing and go, stop saying that? This is the big misconception. It's this. Is anything that popped to your mind when I say something like that?
Sure, there's loads of stuff sometimes on online, like, you know, I think the biggest thing too is like when we talk about interval training, or we talk about, like, I don't know, like, I hear a lot of times zone 2, but I always go to ask people, what's zone 2? Like, what's zone 2? Like, you know, oh, I'm doing a zone 2 run today. What is that? You know, and then you're just going out doing a straight run at it. Like, that's not how it's done at all, you know. It's zone 2 work broken up into intervals. And then, you know, that's another topic of conversation, is like, what exactly is zone 2, you know? And then yeah, there's you know, there's a big difference between the terminology in the sport and like actually how that's applied. So somebody can talk the good talk, but like, how is that actually transferred into the coaching is a different story. Like, you can get every coach in the world on here and they can talk about VO2, threshold, hills, all of this, everything I've said today. But like, then it's like, what's your cocktail like? Like, how do you mix it? And that's the key. Like, that's the key. And it's knowing with each individual what's the right time and what's the balance of all of these, you know. And unfortunately, there is no one answer for that. It is so different for everyone. But at the end of the day, I don't think you need to throw a load of things at at once. It's just a couple of basics done right, and getting a feel for training, and again, holding on to good energy. And then at the end of the day, like, consistency is your best friend. Like, you know, if somebody comes to me and they say, I have a marathon in 2 months' time, I'm like, I'm not your man. Like, I'm not your man. Like, I'm not starting you off in marathon training 10 weeks out, like, especially when you haven't even put in general work. Like, that's not my philosophy. I don't believe in that. I just won't. I can't do it. I can't put you out in a 30K run when you haven't even been consistent with a few 8K runs. I just don't believe you'll absorb the work, you know. And so I'm a big believer in like general fitness coming before specific fitness. So how the hell could you get fitter at a marathon if you haven't gotten fitter at 5K, 10K? Like, it just doesn't add up. Now, if it's a case that you just want to run the distance, well, then I don't think you need me. You know, like, I think anyone can go out and run 42K, you know, but do you want to get fitter? Do you want to bring your running to another level? Well, then that's a different story, you know.
You really hate this podcast, don't you?
No, not at all. But these are the these are the questions that need to be asked and to be answered, you know.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna follow up on one thing real quick, because not that it surprised me or anything like that, but a lot of your reels and stuff, because you're so outgoing and you say enthusiastic you are for running, you do races, you promote races, hill training, all the rest. A lot of your stuff is from the air kind of thinking and on a treadmill. Don't tell me you're a fair weather racer after all this, or a fair weather trainer after all this. You use the treadmill a lot in your training. Do you, or is, because I see you do lactate threshold tests and stuff like that. When you're using the treadmill, does that change? Like, does pacing change because you're not doing the outdoor elements? Is it just easier to get it in, or does people need to use treadmills more? What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of the treadmill. Obviously, you know, every workout, I would jump on the treadmill once a week. For those even that I coach, if that's something they like to do, I would promote it for a couple of reasons. One, like, okay, so I would take my lactates when I'm doing a threshold session to keep me within my zone. In Ireland, in Dungarvan, when you live by the coast and it's windy and you run into the wind, your heart rate goes up 10 beats and your pace has gone back 10 seconds, 20 seconds per K slower. And so that means if you're trying to run the same pace into the wind, the intensity has gone way beyond what the target has been of that session. And so you might think, because like I would say to somebody, I was like, okay, lads, you have 8 by K this evening at 4 minutes per K based off this is your threshold pace, but you go out and it's a gale force wind and you're running 4 minute Ks. I was like, no, that was on a fine day. That's now the equivalent of probably running 3:45 pace. Your heart rate is up and that. What I like about the treadmill is that it's the same environment. So for that specific controlled threshold work, it really keeps people within the zone. Also too, like, you know, just it's a good habit to have being able to jump on the treadmill if it's like lashing rain out. Like a lot of people think they're achieving something by being tough going out doing it, but I'm a big believer in running to the correct and training zone, not necessarily being a hard man, you know, because I want to see the hard man on race day, not in training. Like, you know, that's where I want to see the you know, the toughness come out. I want you to see, to just be able to tick the efforts you need to be on training days. I like it because it's controlled. I've noticed from my own training and taking lactates and heart rates, I can dial in, I can hit the same intensity week in, week out. I find when I'm outside, it's just, it can be a lot more all over the place. And so if you're outside the whole time, I feel you can get battered by the wind, where like when you're on the treadmill. Also, the other side of it is too, it saves us looking down at the bloody Garmin every minute. You just log the pace, you zone in, and then you get into a flow and you just start thinking in a nicer rhythm. You know, you're not looking up and down the watch, like, you know, so I think there's something nice about that. Also, I think in this country, it's nice to get a bloody sweat on, like, you know, like, you know, so for those reasons, like, it's not something you have to do, but it's something I date for these reasons why I say it's a good idea. It's also a good idea to have a habit built up in case it is an awful day out and you jump on, you know. And then, like, you know, in the winters here in Ireland, like, not everyone lives in a city that they have the street lights and stuff like that. So after an evening of work or before work, it's easy to jump on the treadmill.
Absolutely.
Now, I hate it for easy runs. I will not jump on a treadmill for anything other than a workout. I hate it for a run.
So your tempos, your intervals, something that's a very prescribed pace, distance, time you're on for a hard session.
Yeah, exactly.
What's zone 2?
Zone 2. I don't know. I have no idea. Ask some of those Instagram influencers.
That was good. David, we have taken up a lot of your time, and I've no doubt we probably will, if you're happy to come back on at some point, do another episode when me and Sean do some research into more zone 2 and come back with some answers and tests. It's absolutely amazing. Obviously, as this episode's being released, people are looking forward to Dublin, and we do like our guests to talk about any, and you know that course so well. Have you any last minute tips for those who are showing up to slog it out and those who are showing up to race, or maybe a lot of people looking for their sub 3 hours? What last minute advice do you have in this last couple of weeks? And obviously we've mentioned energy and conscious of that. What last bit of advice do you have for people?
So one thing, like you either had enough time to train or you didn't. So make sure you don't over push leading in. You know, you have to now, like, there has to be a point where you start to freshen up, you know, and don't be trying to catch up for lost time. You know, allow freshness to take a role in it as well. And then obviously your fueling is massive when it comes to the marathon. So, you know, have your method broken down of your fueling the day before, your fueling the day of. And I'm talking about in terms of like whether it's gels and stuff like that. Know how much carbs you want to be taking on an hour. And then know the course, like Dublin itself is a little bit hillier the first half. So, and then also take into consideration when you stand on the start line today, what's the weather like? Is it actually, is it uphill the first half and the wind seems to be blowing into your face the first half, you know? So, be flexible, be flexible. And most of all, like, remember you're doing it because you enjoy it. The atmosphere out there is electric. And like, as I always say to people, like, you can be as nervous as you want about the race, but the work is done. So you don't have to think about it. You just go run and it comes out. Like, actually, I remember years ago talking with Owen Everard, and I know you had him on the podcast there recently as well. Owen always said a good one to me. He says, nerves, he says, he says, they mean nothing, he says, because like at the end of the day, like the work's done or it isn't, and the form comes out in the day. So what are you worrying about? What are you thinking about? Like, it's either there or it isn't. All you'll do is cripple yourself with thinking. So like, also remember that you have decided to do this because you enjoy it. So go enjoy it,
Absolutely brilliant, David. It's been great having you on. Full of knowledge. Absolutely loved it. And that is pretty much it for this week's episode of the Any Given Runday podcast with myself, David, and Eric. Take care.
Cheers, guys.